Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do pretty much every Sunday. You can ask gardening questions down in the comment section below the video. And that's where I pick from them each week. And I think there's like 22 or something for this past week. So thank you guys very much for participating. The sun is coming up. That is coming up over Los Angeles over there. I think you can see. I'm probably a little dark. I'm going to change the angle in just a second. But Pacific Ocean, sunrise, coming over Los Angeles right there. This is the mountains that come down in Malibu, where the mountains just kind of roll right into the water where the beginning of the Pacific Coast Highway is. We're here actually doing a little bit of work at a couple of nurseries filming, and nice little spot to be in this morning filming this video. Let's see. So I started a holiday sale on everything over on the HortTube with Jim Putnam website, and all the t-shirts are going to be 10% off for the month of December. The Learn to Garden video series is going to be $50 off, and you use the code Learn to Garden. And the weekly garden planner is also $50 off this is all the way from now, as you're watching this, all the way through the month of December for all three of these. And it's a weekly garden planner is the code for that. So all those will be on the screen here. So if you're interested in purchasing any of those for holiday stuff, and there's also gift cards on the HortTube website that you can purchase as well. So somebody can use the gift card to buy a t-shirt or buy a consultation or whatever. So those are that's the sale for the holiday season, and thank you guys for considering it, and thank you for any of those folks who have purchased those things over the course of the year. Thank you. Let's see. We're going to jump into some questions pretty quick. So somebody wants a video on seed starting for beginners. I have an entire playlist devoted to seed starting on the channel. So there's a video, the first video in that series is building the light rack that we have at this house. I built it at the old house, and we still use it at the new house, and it works great. So if you want to go back and take a look at that video, and the grow lights that are in it are still linked down below it, and that kind of thing, if you're interested in purchasing any of those things that were in that original video. Because they want to save money on plants. It wants details on video lights, it wants a video on the lights and all those kinds of things. That if you followed that playlist, you could learn how to start almost any kind of seed that can be started. Outside of, I've never really shown a lot of shrubs or anything, but any perennial or annual is in that playlist at some point in the last 7 years of video content on this channel. And there'll be more this spring as well. We'll in all likelihood show our seed starting, but we don't start anything until around February. So that's when those videos will be coming out. So somebody propagated hydrangeas this summer in zone 8B. Should they plant the younger tender plants now or wait until spring? I always carried my rooted cuttings over the first winter and spring, planted them in containers. I wasn't planting them in the ground necessarily, but I was potting them up into containers. If it was like hydrangea paniculatas, you could definitely go ahead and put those in the ground. They're so incredibly cold hardy. I would kind of judge it just based on the size that they are. It may be easier to overwinter them in the containers and just don't let the soil freeze solid on them. We had all of our rooted cuttings in a house that was allowed to get cold in the winter. It's important that they get that cold stratification. So they need to be cold but not frozen. And if you're in zone 8B, you probably only have maybe 10, 12 nights of winter that you'd have to protect them. So I'd probably leave them in the container, let them flush out in the spring, get a little bit of size on them, and then put them in the ground. But again, if they just took off and grew pretty quickly after they rooted, maybe they're big enough to go ahead and put in the ground. So you're in the spot where you probably could get away with either. Let's just say that. I kept my stuff. We propagate. I was rooting literally a few 100,000 things in the late spring and early summer every year at my nursery, and one of the reasons we kept them as rooted cuttings through the winter is because if I potted them, they were going to be much bigger. They were going to take up a much bigger area that I would have had to continue to protect those little plants in. We would have gone from these 50 cell trays. That 50 cell trays would have all of a sudden been a couple, 100 square feet or something or whatever, in space that I would have had to protect instead of that one little tray. So that was one of the reasons that I did it. For you, that's not an issue, but anyway, that's one of the reasons. It's easier to protect when they're in a small container, right? Let's see. Propagated hydrangeas. Okay, that was trying to read the same question again. Okay, all right, Jim. Okay, I think we probably need to change this angle. I just wanted to show you guys this sunrise. Here's the other view with the mountain instead. Let me know if a mountain lion is up here behind me. There are rattlesnake signs out here. It's kind of funny in the desert. It just feels like all the plants and everything are just trying to kill you out here. But I do love coming out here and IDing all the things out here in the west that I don't get to see on the East Coast. Let's see. Somebody said difference between planting and transplanting. Often transplant during winter, so why not plant too, especially because of current drought? You could definitely plant during the winter time. No real reason that you can't plant during the winter time if your soil doesn't freeze solid. So I don't think there is any difference there between planting or transplanting. It's just always been, people want to know the exact best time to do something. So the exact best time to do something would probably be, in the fall, planting woody shrubs that are very hardy in your area. In the spring, planting woody shrubs that are, and herbaceous perennials and annuals, of course, because they won't die in the wintertime, in the spring. And then transplanting when something is completely dormant, rather, that could be any time between November for some people and February. But that everybody also wants to narrow down the exact best time. Well, of course, if your ground doesn't freeze in the winter and the plant you're planting is acclimated to your area, plant it in the wintertime. Absolutely. I plant 12 months out of the year, and I say it in every video where I'm saying, this is the best time to plant this. I'm also saying I'll plant it anytime. You'll hear me say that all the time because I want to make sure that folks understand that the best time doesn't mean the only time. Okay. Somebody is wondering how our Miss Kim is doing after the rejuvenational pruning. Have we replaced it? No, we haven't replaced it, and we won't know how it's doing until it leaves out in the spring. It was, when we got back from a trip up to the Northeast, we came back to that 3/4 of our Miss Kim lilac that was probably 7 feet tall at the time was dead. And I noticed before we had left that it was already looking a little off in some way. There was one branch still very much alive, so I fully expect it to recover from that pruning. Whether or not I have the patience to wait for that full recovery, those are two different things. Okay, so we shall see this next spring how it looks as it comes back out, but we won't know anything about it until it leaves out in the. They leaf out pretty early, so sometime in April we'll know. Somebody said they're in zone 7A. Can I still plant camellias, specifically October Magic Ruby and April Dawn? So, this is this is definitely a tricky one. If you're going to plant camellias in zone 7A at this point, that are only zone 7 hardy, there are a few zone 6 hardy camellias, but if you're planting these that are only 7 hardy and you're in 7A, just make sure two things: the plant is very acclimated, okay, so that you're not seeing any new growth on it, which you shouldn't. Camellias usually do all their growing in the spring and early summer, and they're usually done even for everybody except for flowering this time of year. So I don't think you'll have an issue with the with them having growth on them that could get damaged. The open flowers may be a different thing. If they're flowering, if they're in full flower and then you get a hard freeze right out of the gate, that could set those flowers back. So if you want to enjoy the flowers and keep them mobile until they're kind of done, that may be an option. Just know, yes, you can put them in the ground in zone 7A for sure this time of year, but know that you might want to cover them a couple times. If you were going to get a few temperatures that were below your kind of normal low temperatures. So if you were going to get something that was single digits this winter, I'd probably have a cover over them this first winter in the ground. This is a good question, and probably one that people have a lot of. Is it possible to create a planting bed around a large root flare of a maple? Extensive flare, so where the roots come out toward the ground, which you should be able to see on the tree, and then you just really have a lot of surface roots, which red maples typically do in our landscapes. They have a challenging slopes and dense roots. Is it a solvable problem? I think the tree would definitely be happy with a bed around it, regardless of whether you could get anything to grow around it or not. So, I don't know if you currently have turf growing up to it or what you have going on with it, but I would think the tree would always be happier separated from a lawn area. And then, one option is to try some various ground covers. I would probably, I might avoid ivy, but you could try a few ground covers in there. You don't have to make this bed and then spend $800 and then figure out that it won't work. You could go in there and just get find a garden center that sells some smaller ground cover pieces, and try to plug a couple of them in there and see if any of them will survive around it without breaking the bank doing it. But again, always your plants, your trees are probably going to want to be separated from your lawn areas with some sort of mulched space. Let's see. This person is in Atlanta. They have a highlights arborvitae on the west side of their house in direct sun, March through September, 12 to 6 p.m., heavy morning shade. Is that enough sun for it to grow? Probably, but you won't. That 6 hours of sun is probably enough to grow it. If you see it starting to get thin, though, you want to get it out of there quick. So a lot of times it's, woody plants aren't just going to die typically unless we're drowning them. But most other scenarios, they don't just die. So if you see something that's a little thinner than it should be, it's probably in too much sun, or you've underwatered it and it's, thinning for another reason. But I think you'd have time to figure that out regardless, and then rescue it in some way if you needed to later. But that probably is enough sun. Let's see. Especially, it's a plant that doesn't necessarily want to be that far south anyway. So you're it may be helpful that you're getting the exact amount of sun that it needs and not a lot more. Okay. Let's see. Ideas on how to maintain garden beds that wash away in torrential rain in the summer. So I wrote this one down. There are 800 versions of this from a person, somebody thinks that they have a slope and it's minor, and then somebody probably has a slope like what's behind me back here. And so there's variations in this kind of thing. There's also variations in, like here in California, they're, in a month or two, they're going to potentially get torrential rains for a few weeks, and the water comes down here pretty quick. So it might only be occasionally. It might only be, there's a lot of different scenarios here. And I wrote this question down because there's sometimes, this is what I did for a living for a long time as a landscaper, a lot of what I did was deal with folks with the way the water moves across the property. I think that if you're struggling to figure that part out, that might be the one time, there are probably a few times that you might think about hiring someone to come and take a look at it. It might need physical walls, barriers, piping, French drains, whatever it is. It may be helpful to try to get, if it's a situation where it's fairly severe and things are wash away like every time it rains, that may be the time I actually hire somebody to come in and help me. Even if I'm still going to do the work myself, it could just be a designer or somebody like that. Somebody that's, because this is what I did for a long time. I could go into a property and go, hey, we're going to have to move this water this way and, move it that, you could just tell you're going to have issues. And a lot of times people just don't know. They're buying a house, and the houses can be so close together now. And then between the driveway and the house and a patio or whatever, you're forcing a lot of water in through this tiny bit of drainage that's left on the property. So again, I only wrote that down. I can't really solve it because I can't see it, right? But I can tell you that if you're having a situation where something like that's happening over and over and over again, I might hire someone to help me out to get started. You need to I say this in consultations a lot, sometimes you need to just get to the starting line is important. Okay, Somebody has a rhododendron that's turned scraggly after 2 to 3 years, down to 2 canes with healthy foliage. How can you reset them to get them to fill out? Whack it back is the question. In 8A, Apex, North Carolina. Rhododendrons can be a little tricky in zone 8 in Apex and the flatland with the clay and the heat. Ours, we have the one on the back line and it's in dry shade, and it wasn't all that happy, and it thinned out, but it's come back from that. So I don't know how long. It says after 2 to 3 years, it's down to 2 canes. I hate to say this, sometimes it might not be the right plant for the right place. Obviously, you can try to cut them back, but when you only have 2 canes, if you cut for me, I wait it out, probably see if I get some new growth this following spring, and then prune it once I see it's actively growing and it seems kind of happy. I don't like to butcher things necessarily when they're already super, super stressed. So that might be the way I handle that. But keep in mind, it's such a strange plant, because if you go up to the mountains where it rains so much on those rhododendrons, but they're on a slope, so the water is constantly moving around their roots, as opposed to in Apex, where you're on probably a fairly flat piece of property, and it's either bone dry or it's sopping wet, and it's not a great combination for them. Plus the heat, they don't grow in Apex just naturally. They're 100 miles away, in the mountains or so, 150 miles away in the mountains. But anyway, I might wait a little before I start cutting it hard and see if I can get a little bit of growth on them. And then sometimes it's just not the right plant, and we can move on from it. If it's causing you more of your thinking than anything else in the garden, sometimes I'll just get rid of them. Let's see. This person is in zone 8B in the Puget Sound in Washington. Is it too late to plant in November? Both conifers and deciduous trees. Any different procedures for planting conifers versus deciduous trees? No, I don't. I plant everything pretty much the same, but it seems like 8B, Puget Sound, Washington, it would be the time to plant. I mean, because this is when your rain is moving in. I saw on the radar the other day that it already kind of moved into the coastal areas up there in the Pacific Northwest. I was there last year. We filmed at Isley Nursery on like the November 2nd, November 3rd, something like that. And it was like 2 days later when the rain moved in. We could see Mount Hood while we were there. When we first got there, and then like a day or two later, it was gone. It was just, and there's just in a fog, for months. But I would think that this would be the best time of year to plant for you, because, this is the time of year you have moisture, consistent moisture typically. And I don't think there's any difference between planting one thing over another. Where I start to differentiate is, like, I'll plant annual flowers a little differently. I'll invest a little more in that, because I have such a short season with them that I don't want them underperforming, during that short season. And perennials, some of our native perennials, I don't put as much, do as much organic material on, but not a lot of differences between most things, putting them in the ground. Somebody's in zone 8B. Their live oaks are covered by Spanish moss. Beautiful, but harmful in excess, ? Should they reduce some of the moss they can reach? It typically is not damaging to the tree, unless it's a weight related issue on a small tree or something like that you could reduce the weight on. But it's not a parasite. It literally just uses it's like hanging out clothes on it, basically. So it's not parasitic where it's actually hurting the tree. It's just using the arms of the tree to grow on. So it's not damaging the tree unless it's a weight related issue. So typically, that's a symbiotic relationship that all of any place you have Spanish moss and live oaks together, they're going to be together for sure. Of course, the Spanish moss grows in all kinds of things, but it's particularly beautiful on the live oaks. Again, it's a weight related issue, possibly, but a big, strong, old live oak can hold up, all the Spanish moss that can grow on it, probably. Oh, somebody asked about my favorite podcast. When we're driving, when we're riding, I like there are a couple true crime podcasts that I'll listen to, and I don't really. So, sometimes when I get these questions, I wonder if it's, if they're asking if I'm listening to any like horticulture or podcasts like that. There are some things I'll listen to about regenerative farming. This is something I've been probably since I was like 23, 24. I got a job with a landscaper who we were doing organic lawn care, and we went to a conference in St. Louis on regenerative farming, and it was early. This was 1992, before anyone was talking about really participating in regenerative farming, and it was just the early alarm bells for the damage that we were doing to all these farms everywhere. And no-till farming was just kind of the beginning of that. And like and this is kind of what I teach on this channel. It's kind of a version of regenerative farming to your own garden. So there's a couple podcasts that I might listen to on that, but nothing really in horticulture. I kind of want to break from it. So I'll listen to some sort of true crime or comedic thing, interviews with celebrities or whatever, when we're listening to a podcast. Can you spread old potting soil in garden beds, or will it be harmful? No, it won't. It won't be harmful, but I would spread it out, a thin layer, over a larger area without, you're not gonna hurt anything. I reuse it. I don't take anything and dump it off the property. We use that organic material and just put it back into put it back right on top of the soil somewhere. Could even go in the vegetable garden, unless you put a bunch of synthetic fertilizer like Prills on top of it. I don't want to dump that stuff, that plastic coated fertilizer, out all over the place. So you might look at that. I don't even buy those potting soils that have those fertilizer Prills in them. So I used them as a nurseryman because I needed controlled release fertilizer, but I don't want them in my own garden at all. A couple of the questions from the leaf video from earlier this week. That's been several videos, single plant videos, and then there was a video on leaving the leaves in the landscape last Friday. I don't know what else has gone up since then. One on container plants should have gone up. I haven't filmed it yet as I'm filming this for 5 Minute Friday, and I don't remember if there was anything else. But the couple of questions from that leaf video. Should they put a thin layer of mulch over their leaves in the spring to kind of neaten it up, or remove the leaves? You definitely don't have to remove the leaves, but this is exactly what we do. The leaves fall off the big oak in the back garden. They cover the ground for the winter. As spring is starting and we're kind of, wanting the garden to look spiffy at that time, we put a thin layer of hardwood mulch over the top of it to neaten it up. That's exactly what we do. If it still seems like your leaves are super, super thick at that time, maybe I would thin them some. But I would have probably backed up the clock and thinned them earlier. If they're this deep, that's just too much probably for one area, and I would thin them out over a bigger area. But if it's just, just a matted down bunch of leaves like this, yeah, decorative mulch right over the top of it. And then somebody said, can I put pine straw on top of leaves once they've fallen? Or is this too much? You can absolutely use pine straw over the top of your leaves after they have all fallen off. The pine straw breathes really well. It'll allow the leaves continue to break down through the winter. So that will be your decorative version. I said last week we were expanding the Raleigh garden, and it will be native plants in the expanded space. This person wanted us to talk about native species of insects, how they interact with those plants. And I try to do that when I talk about some native plants. Our possum haw viburnum in the back garden, when that original video went up on the Garden Plants channel, it'll eventually get moved over to this when I talked about things like that. And yes, I think that's an important part. Our native pollinators do interact with our non-native plants, a lot of our non-native plants as well, and it probably needs to be pointed out when that's a thing as well. Let's see. Somebody said, by deep wood chip method, are they on top of the soil or incorporated into the soil at a fair depth? You definitely don't want to incorporate wood into your soil. So this is definitely sitting on top. Be careful tilling this wood material down in the soil, especially if you're in an area that stays kind of wet, because that wood, if that wood gets buried down into that soil, there's not necessarily enough oxygen or any of the good thing in sunlight and anything else it might need to break down properly. So then it starts breaking down improperly, which means it just rots, and you build a different kind of soil, which is a little funky, and you don't want to do that. So you'll go from you'll end up with anaerobic bacteria, anaerobic conditions that will be problematic for you. So definitely on the top, try to put as little wood material buried down in the ground as possible. Okay. I guess I should again just call this channel Wood Chips with Jim Putnam, but we're talking about, like I said, I've spent a lot of time in my life talking about regenerative farming, but for homeowners. This is my style of trying to create, basically by turning your garden into a carbon sink, which is basically what we're doing. We're building carbon in our soils, and our plants are happier for it. Our soils are happier for it. All the life in the soil is happier for it. All the food that we can grow in it is more nutrient dense. It's no different in your garden than it is for some farmer that needs to rebuild their soils to, grow better chickens or cows or whatever crop, that they're growing in the ground. Okay, so again, wood chips with Jim Putnam. How do you know when wood chips have turned to humus? You can just go out there and put it in your hand and see that there's very little wood material left. There'll still be some, little chunks of wood here or there that haven't broken down completely, but you'll be amazed how fast your soil can actually eat these things once they get going. Once the engine starts. Sometimes the engine can be a little slow to start, depending on how bad the conditions are. You do need water. So if you're in an area that doesn't get rain for 6 months at the time, it will take a little water to get that system going, and then it becomes a great holder of water in the future. But initially, it will need some water to get started. Any negatives about leaving leaves on grass area to kill the grass with the aim to create new beds? No, absolutely not. I would bury, if leaves are what you got and you want to create a new bed area, I'd bury that grass. For sure, and let it rot. Let the grass rot underneath it basically during the winter time. That's a good strategy for killing that grass. Number 21, they lost their vegetable garden to weeds. They pulled them, but they had already seeded themselves. Is it best strategy to reduce germination? What's the best strategy to reduce germination of those seeds? And I think they asked about tilling. I definitely wouldn't till it. So when we plant our vegetable garden in the spring, we do put a small compost cap back over the vegetable garden in the early spring. And so that little cap helps prevent some weeds. But then of course, there's a disturbance of planting the individual plugs out there that are going to create breaks in those barriers where you're going to get some weeds. I'm always going to get some weeds in the vegetable garden. But then the main thing we do is in between the rows of vegetables, we put wood chips. So we have wood chip paths in our vegetable garden. You can go back and look at that from last April and May, I'm sure during the video content as we were putting in the vegetable garden. And those wood chip paths, the wood chips break down during the season and basically they're helping improve the soil. They're helping me prevent weeds. They're giving me something to walk on in the vegetable garden that doesn't compact as much as the compost or soil, the native soil does. They're a little bit more spongy, and so they prevent my foot traffic from causing as much damage. It's just the perfect thing to use in paths. I think paths of all types, but paths specifically in the vegetable garden. And so that's how we're preventing a lot of the, I don't put the wood chips right up to the vegetable plants, just in the paths, in the open areas that are remaining in the vegetable garden. That's the best way to prevent weeds out there. You're still gonna get some weeds, but it's a good way to prevent a lot of them. Let's see. Number 22, somebody has layers of previous year's mulch compacted and hard. How to approach or remedy this? Again, we showed in that 5-part video series a few years ago, or 2 years ago now, that the mulch was so thick in that garden because that landscaper just kept getting paid to put down, to put down mulch over and over again, and it had just become a layer of kind of moist humus, and then a dry socket, and then a chunky material down here. It was just like layered. You could almost see the layers over the years where they had over mulched this space. I like to let the mulch break down. There's this delicate balance between letting it break down too much and ending up with lots of weeds, but not letting it break down enough that you end up with thicker and thicker and thicker layers. Keep in mind your mulch is typically a bark rather than the wood chips. The wood chips are wood and they break down rather quickly. The bark is intentionally resistant to rot, right? It's the outside part of the tree. And so it breaks down slower, which makes it a pretty good mulch for, you know, not having to mulch quite as often. So that's why we're using it. But it can, you know, stack up over time and create dry pockets and dry sockets in it and that kind of thing. I think it's, unfortunately, it's just time. That's what we did at that house. We went in there for the first time, one of the first times I'd ever gone in, pulled mulch back, planted plants, put the mulch back, and didn't mulch. And we kind of let the weeds, there were some weeds there over the next 6 months or so before we did our first official mulching on that landscape job. But it just needed to break down. But I didn't, I've seen some people will take and use some sort of like spiky tool to go in there and just kind of break it up just a bit. So that's one option, just to try to get some air down in it. Air would be helpful for that mulch to break down, but I don't know. I think time is what you actually need here. And make sure you're, unfortunately, irrigating it perhaps if it's really, really dry. Like this year was particularly dry, which was probably not a good situation for a very thick mulch layer to break down properly. So somebody asked the best NPK ratio for pansies. So that's nitrogen, potassium, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium ratios for pansies and violas. They're in 7B Richmond in pots. They get contradictory info. I would just get some sort of one that says pansy food on it. You can buy it on Amazon probably, but I don't know. You know, pansies actually are not the easiest thing in the world to grow, and you'll see lots of annual growers that don't grow pansies. Like there's a lot of annual growers across the country. The people that grow pansies, they're very specific. They do have very specific needs, and they're not necessarily part of the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium issue. It's actually a couple micronutrients that they need. But I just never were. Unfortunately. When we plant pansies in the fall, organic fertilizers don't work as well. And we do need to push those pansies just a little bit to get some size on them before we get the worst of the winter. So it's like a kind of a catch-22. If I use organic fertilizers on them, the organic fertilizers work by the soil microbes breaking it down and making it available for the plants. But when the soil temperature gets too cool, those microbes aren't active, and so the fertilizer doesn't work as well, which is the natural system. The fertilizer should only work when the plants actively need it and they're actively growing. So that's why organic fertilizers work so well. But then we turn around and we want to grow something during the winter time and put some growth on it in the late fall, something like pansies or violas, where we're doing a ornamental horticulture. And then you kind of have to switch over on the pansies to a synthetic fertilizer. But you can find just some sort of pansy fertilizer is just going to be fine. I'm not going to worry about the NPK ratio so much, you know, how much nitrogen and how much phosphorus, don't worry about that as much. One that's specifically for pansies should be absolutely fine. All you're trying to do right now is just get them to kind of double in size and thicken up just a bit before the worst of the winter comes, or the rabbit invasion that may come later comes. Okay, last one for this week, number 24, and thank you guys for watching. Again, everything's on sale on the HortTube channel. This is the link, or the codes for the weekly garden planner and the Learn to Garden video series, and the 10% off the t-shirts. So there's a code for each of those things, and thank you guys very much for watching and participating, and ask questions down below for next week. Somebody wants a salt-tolerant plant list video, and several people had chimed in and said, yes, please. That is definitely something we're going to work on this spring, and something I've definitely started mentioning in the single plant videos that I've been putting up, because this is one of those salt tolerant things. Obviously, some people live in colder areas and they literally are salting the roads, so that's an issue. But the bigger, one of the bigger things is, you know, that especially for places like apartment complexes, the dogs outnumber the people in a lot of places, and the dogs are peeing on the plants and causing damage. So we need salt tolerant plants for situations with high dog traffic, and of course winter weather related issues as well. So thank you guys so much for watching.